There are certain moments in the calendar that people notice without fully understanding why they feel different. Friday the 13th has always been one of those days. For generations, this date has carried a strange reputation. Some people fear it. Some people laugh at it. Others treat it like just another ordinary day that happens to fall on a Friday. But every once in a while, certain dates invite us to pause for a moment and look more closely at the patterns we carry through our lives. Not because the date itself has power over us, but because moments like these can serve as reminders. They interrupt the usual rhythm of routine thinking. They make people stop, even briefly, and ask themselves questions they normally move past without noticing. And the interesting thing about days like Friday the 13th is that they reveal something subtle about human behavior. Most people walk into moments like this carrying the same habits, the same mental clutter, and the same emotional weight they carried yesterday. They don't pause, they don't reset, they don't release anything. They simply continue moving forward exactly the way they always have. And because nothing changes inside them, the day itself feels ordinary. But occasionally, someone approaches moments like this differently. They take a moment before the day arrives. They look honestly at what they have been carrying with them. Certain habits, certain thoughts, certain emotional patterns that have quietly followed them for months or even years. And they realize that not everything they have been holding on to still belongs in the next chapter of their life. The truth is, growth rarely requires dramatic transformation. More often, growth happens when someone quietly releases the things that were never meant to stay. Sometimes it's a habit that drains their energy. Sometimes it's a belief that keeps them stuck. Sometimes it's a role they've been playing for so long that they forgot they were allowed to step out of it. And that's why moments like the upcoming Friday the 13th can become surprisingly meaningful. Not because something mystical suddenly appears in the sky, but because awareness has a way of appearing when people finally slow down enough to notice it. If you look carefully, you may start realizing that there are certain things in your life that feel heavier than they should. Certain patterns that no longer feel aligned with who you are becoming. And before this next Friday, the 13th, arrives, there are 6 things that many people quietly realize they are ready to release. The first one is something so simple that most people overlook it completely. It doesn't look dramatic, it doesn't sound philosophical, but it quietly shapes the emotional atmosphere of your entire day. And it begins the moment you wake up in the morning. Most people wake up and immediately move into action. They reach for their phone, they check messages, they scroll through notifications. Their attention is pulled outward before their mind has even had a moment to settle into the day. But what people rarely realize is that the very first moments after waking up quietly set the tone for everything that follows. If the first thing your mind encounters is chaos, distraction, or unfinished tasks, your mind begins the day feeling slightly scattered, not dramatically stressed, just subtly disorganized, and that subtle disorganization has a way of influencing how the rest of the day unfolds. But there is another habit many people carry that quietly contributes to that same feeling of unfinished energy. It's something people see every single morning, and most people never question it. If you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe for daily cosmic insights, astrology updates, and spiritual guidance, because the universe always has a message for you. They wake up, step out of bed, and leave it exactly the way it is. The blankets are tangled, the sheets are uneven, the pillows are scattered, and then they walk away without giving it another thought. At first glance, it seems insignificant. After all, it's just a bed. But environments communicate messages to the mind whether we notice them or not. When a space is left unfinished, your mind subtly registers that unfinished signal. When a room looks chaotic, Your attention absorbs that chaos, even if you're not consciously focusing on it. But when you reset even one small part of your environment, something surprisingly powerful happens. Your space begins to feel intentional again. The room feels calmer. Your mind feels slightly more settled. And suddenly, the day begins with a sense of quiet order instead of subtle disorder. This isn't about perfection. It's not about becoming rigid or disciplined. It's simply about recognizing that small actions have a way of shaping larger experiences. Before Friday the 13th arrives, many people find that releasing small forms of environmental chaos is one of the simplest ways to reset their energy. Not because the date demands it, but because awareness invites it. And once someone begins noticing small patterns like this, they often discover something else that has been quietly influencing their life for much longer. Something less visible than an unmade bed, but far more powerful. It's the habit of ignoring your own intuition. Almost everyone has experienced this moment. A quiet internal signal appears, a thought, a feeling, a subtle sense that something is either right or wrong. Maybe it's about a decision you've been delaying. Maybe it's about a relationship that has been draining your energy. Maybe it's about an opportunity that keeps appearing in your mind even though you keep pushing it away. At first, the signal is simple, clear, direct, but almost immediately, the mind begins arguing with it. What if I'm wrong? What will people think? Maybe I should wait. Maybe I need more information. And before long, the clarity that once felt obvious becomes buried beneath layers of overthinking. The interesting thing about intuition is that it rarely speaks loudly. It doesn't shout. It doesn't force itself into your attention. It simply appears quietly and waits to see if you will listen. And when someone repeatedly ignores that quiet signal, life begins to feel strangely complicated. Decisions that should take minutes stretch into weeks. Situations that should feel simple become confusing. People start searching outside themselves for answers they already sensed internally. They ask friends, they read articles, they scroll endlessly through opinions, all while the quiet answer inside them remains exactly where it was from the beginning. Still waiting, still simple, still clear. Before Friday the 13th arrives, one of the most powerful things someone can release is the habit of doubting their own internal guidance. Not because intuition is always perfect, but because ignoring it entirely creates a different kind of problem, a life filled with unnecessary hesitation. And once someone begins trusting their inner signal again, something fascinating happens. Their decisions become lighter. They stop carrying so many mental debates. They move forward more naturally, and the energy that once felt stuck begins flowing again. But intuition isn't the only thing people carry into days like Friday the 13th without realizing it. There is another habit even more powerful, a habit shaped by culture, movies, stories, and years of conditioning. It's the belief that certain days are unlucky. From a young age, people hear the same message repeated again and again. Friday the 13th is unlucky. Something strange might happen. Something might go wrong. And even if someone doesn't consciously believe in superstition, the idea still sits quietly in the back of their mind. So, when the day arrives, something subtle happens. People start scanning their environment differently. If something small goes wrong, it suddenly feels symbolic. If a message arrives late, it feels like a bad sign. If a plan changes unexpectedly, it feels like proof that the superstition might actually be real. But what's really happening in those moments has very little to do with the date on the calendar. It has everything to do with expectation. Expectation quietly shapes perception. When someone expects problems, their mind becomes extremely good at finding them. But when someone approaches the same day with curiosity instead of fear, something completely different happens. They notice opportunities, they notice insights, they notice moments of clarity they might normally ignore. The day itself doesn't change, only the lens through which they experience it. And once someone releases the belief that certain days control their luck, they begin realizing something important. Every day contains the same potential for awareness. Some people simply choose to notice it more than others. And when someone begins approaching life with that level of awareness, they often discover another pattern that has quietly been influencing their behavior for years. It's the pressure to always appear like a good person. At first, that might sound strange. After all, being a good person is something most people value deeply. Kindness, patience, understanding. These are qualities that make the world better. But sometimes, something unexpected happens when someone becomes too focused on maintaining the image of being good. They start editing parts of themselves. They hide frustration even when their feelings are justified. They avoid disagreements even when their voice matters. They stay quiet when they want to speak. They agree with things they don't actually believe. And slowly, without noticing it, they begin performing a version of themselves that fits other people's expectations. The problem with performing goodness is that it often disconnects someone from their authenticity. Instead of responding honestly to life, they respond strategically. They ask themselves not what feels true, but what will keep everyone comfortable. And over time, that creates an invisible kind of exhaustion, because maintaining an image requires constant effort. Before Friday the 13th arrives, many people quietly realize that one of the most powerful things they can release is the need to always appear perfect in the eyes of others. Not because kindness should disappear, but because authenticity creates deeper connections than perfection ever could. And when someone begins releasing that pressure, something unexpected often follows. They begin reconnecting with parts of themselves they had forgotten. Their voice becomes clearer. Their boundaries become stronger. Their life begins feeling less like a performance and more like an honest experience. And that shift alone can change far more than most people realize. Because when someone finally stops performing who they think they should be, they begin discovering who they actually are. And that discovery often leads to one of the most important realizations of all. Sometimes the heaviest thing people carry into the future is not their responsibilities, it's their past. And in the next part of this conversation, we're going to explore something that many people quietly struggle with without ever talking about it: the emotional weight of past wounds. Because before this Friday, the 13th energy shift arrives, there are still 3 more things that many people are ready to release. Things that quietly shape the way they see themselves, the way they see others, and the way they move forward in life. And once you see these patterns clearly, something remarkable often happens. The future begins feeling lighter than the past ever did. There is a moment in many people's lives when they begin to notice something unusual about the way their thoughts work. It often happens quietly, during an ordinary situation that suddenly feels more revealing than expected. You might be having a normal conversation with someone when a small comment unexpectedly stirs a strong reaction inside you. The comment itself isn't particularly harsh or offensive. In fact, another person in the room might barely notice it at all, but something about it touches a deeper place in your memory. Suddenly, your mood shifts. Your mind begins replaying the moment, and without fully realizing why, you feel defensive, uneasy, or slightly hurt. Later, when the situation passes, you might even ask yourself a question that many people quietly wonder about. Why did that affect me so much? Moments like these reveal something important about the way human beings carry their past experiences forward through time. Every person on this planet has lived through moments that left emotional marks: disappointment, betrayal, rejection, misunderstandings, times when trust was broken, or when someone felt invisible in a situation where they hoped to be valued. These experiences are part of being human. They shape us in meaningful ways. They teach us lessons about boundaries, self-respect, and the kind of life we want to build moving forward. But sometimes something subtle happens after those experiences occur. Instead of learning from them and gradually moving forward, people begin building an identity around them. A person who has experienced betrayal may slowly begin expecting betrayal everywhere. A person who once felt abandoned may start interpreting silence as rejection. A person who has been criticized repeatedly may start hearing judgment even when none is present. What began as a single experience slowly becomes a lens through which every new experience is interpreted. And that lens can quietly influence decisions, relationships, and opportunities for years without the person ever fully realizing it. Before Friday the 13th arrives, one of the most powerful things someone can release is the identity of being defined by their wounds. This does not mean ignoring the past. It does not mean pretending painful moments never happened. It simply means recognizing that an experience can become wisdom instead of becoming a permanent definition of who you are. When someone carries their wounds as identity, their life becomes organized around protection. Their energy is focused on avoiding pain. Their attention is directed toward preventing old patterns from repeating. But when someone transforms their wounds into understanding, something changes. The past still exists. The lessons remain valuable. But those experiences stop occupying the center of their story. Instead of constantly reacting to what happened before, a person begins responding to what is actually happening in the present moment. And that shift creates an incredible sense of freedom. Because suddenly life becomes about creation instead of protection. Instead of constantly guarding against the past, someone becomes curious about the future. This is one of the quiet energy shifts many people experience before moments like Friday the 13th. It's the realization that they have been carrying something heavier than necessary. And once that realization appears, another pattern often becomes visible. It's a habit that many compassionate people develop without ever noticing it. At first, it looks like kindness. It looks like generosity. It looks like the natural desire to support the people around you. But over time, something else begins to appear beneath the surface. Some people slowly begin feeling responsible for solving everyone else's problems. If a friend is upset, they immediately step in to fix the situation. If someone around them is stressed, they feel obligated to absorb that stress. If there is tension in a group, they quietly try to smooth it over. At first, this role can feel meaningful. It can feel like you are the dependable one, the supportive one, the person who keeps everything together when things become difficult. But there is a point where helping stops being healthy and begins becoming something else entirely. It becomes a pattern where someone feels valuable only when they are solving problems. When no one needs their help, they feel restless. When someone else struggles, they feel responsible. And slowly, they begin carrying emotional weight that never truly belonged to them. The interesting thing about this pattern is that it can keep both people involved stuck in the same cycle. The helper continues fixing things. The other person continues bringing problems. Neither person is required to grow beyond the pattern. One becomes dependent, the other becomes exhausted. Before Friday the 13th arrives, many people quietly recognize that one of the most powerful things they can release is the belief that they must carry everyone else's responsibilities. Helping others is beautiful. Compassion matters deeply. But healthy support looks very different from emotional over-responsibility. Healthy support allows others to grow. Over-responsibility quietly prevents growth from happening. And once someone releases the need to fix everything around them, something interesting begins to happen. Their energy returns to them. The mental space they once spent managing other people's situations becomes available for something much more important: their own life, their own goals, their own direction. And this shift often reveals another pattern that many people carry without noticing it. It's the habit of constantly filling every moment with noise. Modern life moves quickly. Messages appear instantly. Notifications arrive throughout the day. Information flows continuously through phones, screens, conversations, and responsibilities. Most people move from one activity to the next without ever giving their mind a moment to become quiet. But the human mind processes information in layers. Some thoughts are immediate and obvious. Other insights form quietly in the background, connecting patterns over time until a moment of stillness allows them to surface. When someone constantly fills every moment with stimulation, those insights remain buried beneath noise. Before Friday the 13th arrives, releasing the habit of constant distraction can create something extremely powerful: space. Not empty space in a negative sense, but open mental space where clarity has room to appear. This is often when people begin noticing subtle realizations that had been waiting patiently beneath the surface. A conversation suddenly reveals an insight about a relationship. A quiet walk reveals clarity about a decision that once felt confusing. A moment of stillness connects pieces of a situation that once seemed complicated. These realizations rarely arrive while someone is rushing between tasks. They appear when the mind finally becomes calm enough to recognize patterns it had already been observing. And when someone begins experiencing moments like this, they often notice something fascinating about themselves. They begin seeing how their life has been shaped not just by circumstances, but by the stories they tell themselves about those circumstances. Every person carries internal narratives, stories about who they are, stories about what they deserve, stories about what is possible for them. Some of these stories are empowering. Others quietly limit what someone believes they can create in the future. For example, someone might carry a story that says they are always unlucky. Another person might believe they are not good at relationships. Someone else might quietly believe that opportunities never work out for them. These stories often formed years earlier during moments that felt convincing at the time. But stories are interpretations, not permanent truths. Before Friday the 13th arrives, releasing the stories that limit your future can open the door to something entirely different: possibility. Because once someone questions the story they have been repeating internally, they realize something important. They are allowed to write a new chapter. They are allowed to see themselves differently. They are allowed to move forward without carrying the same expectations that once defined them. And when that realization appears, the entire energy of someone's life begins to shift. Instead of reacting to old patterns, they begin creating new ones. Instead of expecting limitations, they begin exploring opportunities. Instead of holding tightly to what once felt certain, they become curious about what might be possible. This is the quiet transformation that moments like Friday the 13th can symbolize. Not superstition, not fear, simply a reminder that every person has the ability to release what no longer belongs in their life. And when someone lets go of even a few unnecessary patterns, something beautiful often happens. The future begins feeling lighter than the past. And in the final part of this conversation, we're going to explore the last two things many people are ready to release before this Friday the 13th energy shift arrives. They are subtle, but once you see them clearly, they can change the way you approach every day that follows. Because sometimes the most powerful transformation does not come from adding something new to your life. Sometimes it comes from finally letting go of what was never meant to stay.